Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Our topic of today's panel discussion is remote access, a threat vector. After this post pandemic phase, the impact of remote access has been great. And to discuss the details in further, we have our eminent panels for the discussion. And our panel would be of the following people. So it is Mr. Janve Chan, Global Head of OT IoT Practice Entity Limited, Mr. Arga Bose, Head Cybersecurity Practice Tata Advanced Systems Limited, Mr. Subhajit Dev, Global CISO and DPO for APAC region, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories, Mr. Rohan Vaidya, Regional Director, India and SARC CyberArk, and Mr. Prashant Chaudhary, Partner, Risk and Cybersecurity Consulting from EY. Our moderator for the session would be Mr. Zanvi Chan, and I welcome him on stage now.
Hi everyone. Good afternoon to you. I have to apologize first of all for the bad lighting. It is actually at my back. I'll try to block it with my head if it's okay. So nice to meet all of you and thank you for the introduction, Sai. And just a little of myself, call me Chan, please. I go by my last name, and I run the OT IoT cybersecurity practice globally for NTT. What we are here today is to talk about the remote access into the OT network and what threats do they pose. We know that in OT there has been a lot of remote monitoring, but for the last 2-3 years, and especially in the last 1.5 years, remote access has been quite prevalent. And the panel is here to discuss what is that about. Just a little background, you will know that in February this year, early 2021, all smart water utility has been hacked. The main reason for it to be hacked is because of poor remote access hygiene. Specifically, we believe that they have been able to gain access via a poor password from the internet into their network. By that, as a result, the attacker managed to change the content of the chemical content inserted into the water, and that could potentially kill thousands of people. NTT Threat Intelligence Report has also indicated that end users are the main target, not the first priority is not so much of the super secured server, but the lowest hanging fruit. And the lowest hanging fruit usually would be the remote workers, people that use the laptop, because those are less secure. What we are going to talk today is about, hopefully we can touch on remote access and the key differences between IT and OT. We also know that there are multiple ways of accessing doing remote access into OT. It can become from IT into OT or direct into OT. Hopefully, we can touch a little bit on that. There's also multiple technology, whether it's a technology created specifically for the OT environment, for the industrial control environment, or we can leverage technology like CyberArk that can be used to access from the internet into IT, then into OT, or directly into OT. So the combination is, or the permutation is big. Sai, I believe you will be introducing the rest of the panels.
So thank you, Jan, for the introduction. So I'll be calling Mr. Arga Bose onto the stage.
Sure. So, hey, Arga. So maybe the first question, if I can pose it to you, would be what is the main difference between the IT and OT remote access? Because, from a technology-wise, from a policy perspective, they are quite different. But what is the main difference and what is preventing them from adopting IT-based technology or keeping an OT lens on this?
I think the classical case that we can pick up is since the COVID times, things have changed drastically. We continue to see quite a lot of adoption with respect to the remote access, both from an IT perspective, and also largely dependent upon, because the IT and OT connectivity has now been is something that is a key factor to it. We're seeing a lot of traction going forward towards the OT aspects also. However, with respect to the maturity, things are a little bit different in both the environments. The IT remote access, if we say, it's classically dependent upon, things like, you can talk about the basics to like the remote desktops, or for that matter, the remote assistants, like like team viewers kind of stuff, AnyDesk kind of stuff, right? And to the most popular method of accessing that environment is through VPNs, right? And which is very commonly used. Now, the there are certain policies and processes that are defined very categorically clear with respect to the IT, and in terms of the entry, in terms of how a person is able to access it. I'm not even touching and going ahead and into the zero trust network or the SASE aspects of it, because that's something new that's still coming up, and the adoption is not there. But VPN is a very commonly adopted method. Now, in IT, we still have good amount of controls in place, and with respect to keeping the relevant infrastructure up to date with respect to the patches and the controls and segregation of the networks. A lot of things are already in place. By default, by design, a lot of security is already in place. Whereas in the OT, you typically it has been it's a common fact, known fact that a lot of things are kind of driven towards the OT network not being that secure, or a lot of old operating systems and machines are used, as well as a lot of accesses are very basic level driven. I mean, in terms of the passwords are not set regularly, and those kind of things. So the method of access, if I may say so, right, might be the same. Like the entry might be through VPN. So you will get into the IT network, and from the IT network you switch over, and typically you would get into a jump host kind of an environment, switch on to the jump host environment and go into the OT network. And from there, because the other challenge is obviously, there are a lot of protocols that are quite different within the enterprise or within the OT infrastructure in itself, which also drives quite a lot of complications with respect to how things are communicated, and what are the restrictions that you might put into the OT network. While access, the typical the process is that we need to make sure that we find out the right balance between security as well as convenience, right? I mean, the convenience is an aspect that become a necessity, rather, because of the environment's requirements, and the pandemic that brought in a lot of remote work engagements. So from that perspective, I think the biggest difference, I would say, is the amount of control that are there in the network. Now, I mean, there are multiple ways people have. Now there are ways where you can have a unidirectional gateway coming in, through which people can enter into the OT environment, and hence secure the OT environment. And there could be also the other aspect that we also need to look at is, typically the actors that are there. I mean, you have remote workers. The remote workers might be your own organizational people, right? But then we have also the third-party organizations that in OT, which is quite prevalent, and there are a lot of the PLCs and the SCADA systems, where a lot of systems are managed by the third parties, and the access to the third parties, and hence the third party risk that also gets associated and tagged to this particular area. So I think from to sum it up, from a difference perspective, maybe the entry processes might be a little bit different, or it could be that the a lot of organizations today still use the VPNs and the firewall protections to be able to access the OT network. But I think from a maturity perspective, the two networks have a lot of a little difference, and hence the security risks are very high in the OT network from that perspective.
Perfect. Thank you, Arga. Maybe I can pose the next question to Subhajit. So Subhajit, the CISO for Dr. Reddy, a pharmaceutical company based in India. Subhajit, maybe the question to you would be, what are the challenges of enabling your workers from connecting remotely, both from the IT side, the OT side, and also from the supplier side?
Yeah, hello everyone, and thank you, Chan. This is a great question. Remote access to OT networks has always been a significant threat vector, whether the intended users are the company employees or third party contractors and vendors. And with the pandemic, as we have seen, that the organizations have rapidly transitioned into remote working. New business measures were literally enacted overnight. And thus, remote access that were previously considered as an unacceptable risk has now become normal, right? Working remotely essentially means opening networks to external access. And that was previously never open to either such accesses or had very limited access. Interestingly, while every organization has invested a lot into remote work and have fully digitized their workforce, not a whole lot was invested in security controls around the OT connections themselves. So, what it did was that it introduced a whole new set of substantially higher risk to the OT environments that can be very, very critical, right? As a security practitioner, we all know that securing the OT systems and network has always been challenging. Traditionally, the focus for the IT security was always on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But the focus on OT has always been around availability and safety, right? And there are a lot of legacy systems. Upgrade becomes very difficult at times as it entails upgrade of the entire technology stack and very, very cost prohibitive quite often. There are a lot of influx of end of life, end of support systems in the network with no EM support, no security patches. There is also a very high degree of reliance on the OEMs. Traditional security products often hinders on how the OT system works, and hence there are restrictions on what you can install on the OT systems. Then there are these because most of the OT networks are validated under the GMP, CGMP protocol. There is always this validation. So the mean time to respond for key threats has always been lengthy, with a lot of documentation underway. Lastly, we also see there is a skill and ownership gap, right? OT being managed by the engineering teams. There are limited knowledge of the OT security and the traditional IT security folks, and this often creates silos. And mostly, there are times when the OEMs are out of the country. Things have, there's a P1 event, there's a regular maintenance, and the first resort is often to give a remote connection for troubleshooting and resolution. So, on this premise, when we look at the security challenges with respect to the remote access to OT, I would call out four key issues that we are seeing today. The first one is increased complexity and exposure. People accessing from home essentially means more remote locations and end devices. A low-hanging fruit, truly, for attackers. The unmanaged devices that comes in can already be a compromised device. So, detection of anomaly or enforcing a conditional as well as contextual access, the risk identifications become very, very difficult. And then there is this typical syndrome, we call it as a hard perimeter, but a soft belly architecture, right? Once a remote user logs in, they can often access a wide range of critical hosts without further access control. So the ability to expand and track all the network actions hop by hop really becomes a challenge. And then there is this severe lack of correlation between the remote access, the remote users, and also the process being executed. So after the initial authentication at the gateway, there is no way to associate the OT session with the logged in users. So this lack of association and the attribution increases the risk because visualizing the remote access path from the VPN gateway or the system being used for remote to the industrial device becomes really, really impossible. And then what it all cumulatively causes is a lack of proper cyber risk management. So the off-site investigation of security alerts, which essentially needs a lot of improvement in the visibility and the forensic capabilities. There are traditional security tools which are very reliant on rules and signatures, and they have limitations in the face of the new threats. So overall, the way the things are, I believe the remote access is here to stay, and hence it is absolutely important and imperative to solve this challenge holistically. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Suhajit. Just before I continue to Rohan, by the way, you can also pop in your question to the Q&A section of the panel of your web browser. Rohan, maybe the next question to you, since Mr. Aga has spoken about the different users, Suhajit has spoken to about the different software requirements and access to a wide range of hosts. What are you seeing specific to the India and the surrounding region in terms of remote access and also from a data privacy perspective?
Yeah. Thanks, Chan. It's been quite interesting over the last 2 years in terms of the conversations that we're having with people, especially in the OT space. And it all boils down to a very simple fact that once I start thinking as an attacker, what I really want to achieve as an attacker is the privileged access to all these systems which are there. whether it is IT or OT. And as we all know that most of the attackers are the laziest guys, so they would want to kind of get into a system which is less protected, and there is a financial benefit, or they can create some disruption around it with minimum efforts. And that is where the OT really plays a big part into it. All the automation, all the CIO, CISO initiatives has all been driven always on the IT side of it. Primarily, it may be from a reason that they were more from a more proximity to the business guys, more visibility, and probably they were kind of the shining armor in terms of what automation or business they could really bring to the table. Somewhere down the line, the OT was a little neglected part in terms of the maturity they could bring. The other part, which I think was also discussed in the panel, that you have a lot of uh, OEMs where you've got a proprietary systems, and the proprietary systems, multiple proprietary systems in a single plant, make it extremely difficult for any homogeneous policy to be implemented. So that kind of creates an even more challenging situation. The other part, if I look at from an India perspective, uh, India is still a very urban based, talent centric country. And if you look at the OT plants, which or the O2 systems would be in plants which are a little more diverse in the diverse regions. They may be proximity, may be a little challenge, and you have skills which work on the IT systems of the OT part of it are people who would normally would not be wanting to really work there. So either you have junior staff or people who would not really be the best talent in there, which is there. So it creates a lot of a skill, uh, I would say a depreciation in the skills which is there, what you would see in IT and OT. Also, that creates a big gap in terms of the learning, in terms of the situations which are there. Now, especially when you come to remote access, it was still pre-COVID. People still had to go to the plant, they had to log in, do things, and there was a lot of trust based system which worked in the OT because people knew each other, and the systems were still watertight in terms of their WAN or the LAN that they would really use in. The moment it got opened up on a very large uh, thing from a remote access perspective, it kind of opened a floodgate for everybody to enter in. The challenge was using a VPN, which people did believe was the most secure way of doing it, but VPN doesn't give you a granular capability to access. And once you are in, you really don't know what you're doing. And that's where you would look at something from a privilege access management. Now, every OT system which has an IP address would have a master password and a user thing, an administrator user. Now, that's something which needs to be protected. And if that is not protected, then whatever systems or whatever processes you put in place are always going to be challenging. The other part which came in play, especially in the OT systems, was a huge push on the automation. So you've seen a lot of OT systems going through a lot of automation tools which were being implemented so that the processes could be managed less manually, and you could have a very good way from a productivity perspective. And especially with COVID systems, we have seen a lot of the automation tools being sold in the OT system. Now, the moment you were managing human identity, it was still a manageable thing. Now you have to not only manage human identity but also manage machine identity. And the machine identity could be a bot which could be holding maybe 10,000 different identities, which is authenticating and running a small script. Now, if that gets compromised, you have a big catastrophe that you create. Human identity is still something which I would say is a manageable thing and a recoverable thing. But from a human identity to a machine identity, and a combination of that in a heterogeneous system becomes extremely difficult. So, going from a plant based or a OT based in person, non automated, to a remote and an automated system with a lot of robotic process automation which happens, creates a huge attack vector and a very low hanging fruit for any attacker to get in.
And thanks for that, Rohan. So maybe I can ask Prasan uh, one final targeted question. Prasan, so you have heard about people, process, technology. Aga spoke about a VPN. Roshan spoke about the next level on top of VPN, which is the user identity. So Haji was talking about the different user, the different requirements. I guess my question to you, representing your company, is where should we even start? I mean, there's so much stuff that that we need to focus on, especially now you hear about the Log4j, Log4 shell vulnerability that is affecting every single Apache server. And I know that there are OT servers that uses those vulnerabilities. So where should we even start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And it's a very interesting challenge. But one slightly provocative statement with which I will start with is trying to fix OT security problem with traditional IT security tools is like trying to catch monkeys with a fishing rod. So let's and that's where the whole thing starts. And let's go back. Let's go back to maybe before internet came in properly, like 1995 or 1990. I mean, the OT was pretty much still there. I mean, these SCADA systems, the PLCs, everything was there. So what changed? And I think Rohan and Shubhajit did mention that the the fundamentally the OT and the IT networks and the systems are designed totally differently. IT systems, the problem is they're supposed to be designed for security, whereas the OT systems are designed with safety in the mind. And both these systems were coexisting very nicely. I mean, nobody ever talked about OT security till the time we just interconnected these two systems. And our approach in terms of achieving efficiency for good reasons is that interconnect these two systems and try to use the IT network to manage the OT systems. The problem which is coming in is that we are not. So if I ignore the IT network problem, then the OT network has only one problem, which is physical security. And I think except for the case of Stuxnet, I think OT problems with respect to physical security were largely solved, and they were solved because in a plant everybody knows everybody, and that's where there was no need to invest so much in terms of OT security. So fundamentally, our problem is coming on to uh, this meshing up of the IT and the OT networks. And I think one approach is that we fix the OT network security itself, and the other approach is to fix the IT network. So let me start with fixing the OT network itself. So let's take the Oldsmar, the Florida case, right? Uh, so I think we'll have to run with the assumption that the OT network will be breached, just like the way we have all understood and agreed that IT network will be breached. Or so if we are saying, and it's a paradigm shift, that OT network will also be breached, then what are we relying upon as the defense? Because then we just need to get into the entire control systems in the OT network, which is, for example, if you're running a pump, then what is the pump maximum RPM? I mean, okay, let's say 100 RPM. I think that's too less. Let's say 2000 RPM is a good RPM. But if it is hitting, like, say, 10,000 RPM at an odd hour, that has to be a threat intel in itself. Or, for example, if it's a chemical plant and there's always a chemical process, we just need to use those sensors, OT sensors themselves, to figure out that what's going wrong in that OT plant. I think that line of thinking, where we are changing the usage of OT systems from safety to security, that line of thinking has to develop. Because till the time we are not accepting that the OT network will get breached, and we have to use specific process controls inside the OT flow to control that plant, I don't think we'll solve this problem, or we'll be using a fishing rod to catch the monkey. So a lot of investment actually has to go to the OT. The problem is, uh, and sorry if it's another statement in its own, it is the IT security guys who are more excited about OT security. I don't see the OT guys talking about OT security. And I don't think so that the OT guys are talking about security. I mean, any webcam we are buying or any OT camera which we are buying inside the house, their USP is that how cheap they can make it, how cheap they can sell it. So they're absolutely focused on cost. My one of very close friend of mine, and I think he's on this session listening in. They are manufacturing these OT bulbs and fans. And I actually, gave them a proposal that, let's say, for $2,000, I'm going to do a security assessment of your OT bulbs and tube lights which you're about to sell in the market. And their point was, forget $2,000. Even for 2,000 rupees, they're not ready to get an assessment done because they know that none of the customer is going to buy that OT device for security. Not a single bulb, tube light, fridge, refrigerator, even Alexa is getting sold saying that this has security. So even the user, sorry, I'm deviating from industrial users to individual users. Even the users are not really bothered about what exactly they're buying. So that is one problem. Now, having said that, if OT guys are not solving it, and if the users are not really bothered about cost, I think the problem is left for IT security people. So back to the people on this stage who really need to solve it. And then I think we'll have to go with two things in terms of securing our IT network. And I think if you ask me what is my biggest hope right now, so basically, the zero. Personally, I would bet my money on zero trust. So net, just go back. Sorry, Chan, you're saying something.
No, so I think one key item that you say, assume bridge, that has been quite important for across the industry in cybersecurity perspective, because that changes everyone's perspective. Assume that you have breached, and therefore you have to reevaluate what is your most important asset or process or identity or plant or site, and that funnels your investment and your activity. But what I want to try to understand, and I'll pose it to everyone, is how do we even prevent OSMA from happening again? Because we know remote access is going to stay. We know that they're going to come in from the internet. But what can we do to prevent all this from happening again? Because OMAs potentially could kill many, 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 many people.
Okay, I mean, I'll take the first break then.
Sure.
Yeah, I think the key factors to that is obviously, how soon and how quickly we can get our systems, the OT systems I'm talking about specifically, in a better control. First of all, visibility becomes biggest factor today. I mean, and a lot of people have been talking about the visibility in the IT network. Now add on to the OT network, and now you have visibility challenges, to the last mile components as well. And where you're not sure what has been plugged in, who's going to be, who's going to kind of attach those components, and who's going to monitor them, right? So the first thing that we need to do is have better visibility into the network. Second is, how soon can we, as I said before, is to be able to bring the systems that are there today, to a better level of control, from a cybersecurity perspective, which could be patches, more secure way of accessing, authentication, better controls, and maybe, multi-factor authentication attached to it. Uh, segment the access to specific needs, and also monitor. I mean, one thing that we don't do is, once we enter into the network, it becomes very difficult to then track a user's behavior. And I think Rohan picked up a couple of points around that as well. Basically be able to find the last mile access attached to a specific user who's currently doing that activity, right? So all this, the first of all, the visibility. Second, the better systems, and an improvement in the systems and quality of the systems, and also, making sure that, we are tracking and monitoring it in a much better way, could bring in a lot of better controls, and proactiveness towards finding no
Sure.
intruder access.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing that can be implemented fairly easily would be like two-factor authentication because that's
Yeah,
everywhere. I think Microsoft has come out to say that they're going to do away with all passwords, so there will be no passwords anymore in the future. Hopefully that comes true.
true.
Then you have all my fingerprint everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
um, just one thing, I just wanted to bring up. So, Aga, you mentioned about SASE. I also want to bring up technology like zero trust because that has been spoken about in the industry, especially in IT, a lot. I wanted to get a sense, maybe from Supajit or Rohan or Prasan, how disruptive technology like SASE and zero trust is to the OT network. Because in OT, availability is key. However, what we have seen in OSMA, integrity is also just as important. So, how easy it is to implementing like zero trust or SASE.
So maybe I'll take it. Thank you very much. Uh, so see, zero trust. You know, when it comes to industrial cybersecurity, zero trust has been often been spoken about. And while it is important that there is an integration of IT and OT, which and there is an ever increasing trend on doing it for real time information sharing, analysis, and response, zero trust is definitely something which is being spoken about. As the name implies, the processes, the policies, the systems are being designed on a simple premises that there is no such thing as a trusted source. That means that when we, as a cybersecurity team, look at OT security, we are assuming that there are attackers present both inside and outside of our networks, and therefore treat everything as a suspect unless we verify. Right now, zero trust as a fundamental concept, we've been using it for quite some time. We are calling it zero trust right now because it has sort of latched on to a lot of these new things that we do. But essentially, when we specifically talk about remote access and how are we integrating zero trust into it, we have started enumerating all users, group assignments, and permissions, by the need or the business need or the IT need or the OT need as well. We have started mapping assets to the enumerated users and the groups as a first step. And this is how the trust is being established. And then we are designing and implementing the architecture for remote connectivity, which includes different level of protections, both at the network as well as the endpoint as well. We are also including some of these zero trust principles like multi-factor authentication or end user behavioral analytics to understand when we not only authenticate and authorize users, also we're looking at the conditions at which these accesses are being given and the context at which the access is being executed, right? And then we are also trying to bind an user and limit them to a certain device or a equipment or a system and also a network zone, right? But last and not the least, everything needs to be continually monitored, adjusted, and protected. And that's a most important requirement right now when you look at zero trust for OT in itself. Yeah.
No, thank you. It sounds like we need to go back to cybersecurity school, role-based access, assume breach, basic security protection, VPN encryption, and etc. Are those missing? To be very honest, within the OT network. Sorry, by the way, just one note. In OT, so depends on which industry you're in. I know because I just did an assessment for building automation systems, so that's technically classified as IoT. They communicate via multicast, so there is no point to point. You literally can't secure. Okay, if you're not talking to here, you can't talk because they talk to multicast. So
Yeah.
from that perspective, zero trust is going to be a little bit difficult. But I guess what I want to know is, are we really missing the cybersecurity 101 when securing OT?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in this one. So I think in most of the cases we are still I would say we're still to put in 100% of the cybersecurity 101 in the OT, because the OT integration happened in a jiffy and COVID actually accelerated it. Now what is happening is, incidents like the Oldsmart Florida is again a sad reminder that more needs to be done. if I look at it, then it is not very difficult to implement zero trust on the OT networks, because I don't have to focus on to the entire OT network. I just need to focus on the integration point of the OT network. And there aren't too many use cases where I need to give a remote access to the OT. Uh, Actually, if I apply the risk-based principle, and for the riskiest aspects, I can actually eliminate the remote access to the OT network, because this is way too risky. I would never ever give a remote access to my nuclear plant, or stuff like that. It has to be on-prem physical. Uh, then, if I have to focus only on the integration point, and knowing fully well that high risk aspects which can kill human beings and others, I've actually eliminated it entirely for remote access. Then I'm talking about a smaller network, and then I can concentrate all my energy in terms of segmenting that network out, putting a role-based access privilege. I can also put in the user behavior on that, and I can bring in a lot of my tool and technology. In fact, if I'm running a corporate full network, I would actually prioritize the cybersecurity investments into that intersection zone. Having said that, there are some aspects of zero trust which we can, let's say, never implement, like the IoT, the building systems, very difficult. The other specific problem in the OT networks is physical
Sure.
security, because a lot of these
Sure.
OT devices are distributed across. They're not really in a plant, like
Yep.
when I have a
Yep.
OT camera somewhere in a jungle, and how do I put another camera to look who's tampering with this camera? So, some of these we just can't
Where do
deal
you
with.
stop?
Yeah.
Yeah, reduce. So I know that we have less than 2 minutes, and Rohan, do you want to add anything to cap off the entire conversation?
Right. So I think one of the things which probably are still open in terms of the OT or even the IT part of it is when somebody accesses any network, whether it is an OT or IT network, we normally have unlimited privileges. So it's a zero or one. Either I have access or I don't have access. And I think a role-based access and graying of those access is extremely important rather than a 0 to 1. And I would say go with a very basic principle of cybersecurity, which is least privilege. The lesser the privilege you have, the better you are able to manage any of these systems very well. And not only from a human identity, but also from a machine identity. If we go with the fact of the framework that we want is zero trust and apply the least privilege access, and make sure that whatever are the user the administrator passwords or the keys, the API keys or the SSH keys or secrets in the DevOps space, if all these things are secured and the user does not have to really remember, write, or have access to that, that kind of controls a lot of the environment. Also accessing that and then managing user behavior and running analytic tools on the user behavior in terms of looking at the anomalies which could be created, which also gives you a
Sure.
better control over these situations. And as what Prasad
Perfect.
mentioned, your cyber physical systems are now more in play in the OT system. And a combination of a physical and a cyber security framework would really help, because the physical security has been in play for many, many years. Combining that and those principles back into the cyber security principles would kind of create a very, uh, very good framework
Sure.
for looking at OT networks. And that kind of, in a way, eliminates your remote access threats, or I would say at least reduces to a certain extent.
Perfect. I think we have run out of time. Rohan, thank you so much for capping it off for us. Aga, Subhajit, Prasan, thank you so much for joining the panel. And I believe all of us can be reached via LinkedIn. Thank you very much and have a good day. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.